A used boat listing can look like the deal of a lifetime right up until you learn what a previous owner or the manufacturer's own recall history already knew about that specific model year. Today we're covering 3 center console fishing boats with real, documented issues tied to specific production years, the kind of information that actually changes whether a bargain price is really a bargain. Then we're covering 4 boats that have earned something far rarer, genuine long-term owner loyalty. The #1 boat on our best list has spent more than 60 years proving its reputation wasn't an accident. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. Let's get into it. One thing needs to be said before we start. None of the 3 brands coming up should be written off entirely. Every one of them has built excellent boats across most of their production history. What we're covering are specific models, specific years, and specific documented problems that a used buyer needs to know how to investigate, not a reason to avoid an entire company. Here's how we're ranking things today, so the order actually makes sense as we go. For the first 3 boats, we're ranking the seriousness of the documented issue itself, not declaring one entire brand worse than another. For the 4 best boats, we're ranking overall long-term ownership value, durability, resale demand, reputation, and owner loyalty all factored together. Keep that in mind because the logic behind each half of this list is different. Something about the first boat on this list won't show up in a walkthrough or a sea trial. It's sitting quietly in the fuel system, and most buyers never think to ask about it. At number 3, certain Contender center consoles built before 2005 used aluminum fuel tanks that deserve careful inspection before you buy. Contender built its reputation on serious offshore performance, using vacuum-infused construction and a hull specifically engineered to handle punishing conditions at speed. Older examples from this era often appear on the used market at prices that look genuinely attractive compared to newer models offering similar capability, which is exactly why buyers are drawn to them. The issue involves a component choice rather than a structural flaw. Certain pre-2005 models used aluminum fuel tanks, and aluminum operating in a marine environment is susceptible to corrosion over time, particularly with prolonged saltwater exposure. When that corrosion eventually causes a leak, replacing the tank becomes a significant repair, with owners reporting costs in the range of roughly $8,000 to $15,000, a number substantial enough to completely change the math on what initially looked like a bargain. Later production switched to composite fuel tanks, which don't carry the same corrosion vulnerability, and Contender's broader reputation for structural durability remains well-earned across the rest of its lineup. This isn't evidence that Contender builds unreliable boats. It's a reason to check one specific component before you buy an older one. A pre-2005 Contender can still make sense for a buyer who's mechanically informed, insists on a proper survey, and is prepared to negotiate if the tank hasn't been addressed. Before buying, ask directly whether the fuel tank has already been replaced, and if the seller isn't certain, have a surveyor physically inspect it rather than relying on the listing description. So if you're looking at an older Contender, here's the thing to check first. Fuel tank material and replacement history confirmed by a surveyor, not just the seller's word. A cracked hull is serious. What's coming next goes even further, into territory involving fire risk. But before we get there, this next entry is worth its own moment, because unlike the fuel tank issue, this one isn't something a buyer can quietly check and move on from. It's a documented structural finding backed by a federal recall, which changes how carefully you need to treat it. At number 2, Mako 252 models built in 1997 and 1998 carry a documented structural issue that anyone shopping in that exact window needs to understand before making an offer. The Mako name carries real weight among offshore anglers, and boats from this era show up on the used market at prices well below anything comparable currently in production, making them tempting for a buyer chasing genuine offshore capability on a budget. Here's what the documented record shows. Boats from the 1997 and 1998 production years were the subject of an official recall covering approximately 118 units, tied to cracking that developed around the swim platform and the point where the transom connects to the hull. In at least one documented case, a marine surveyor who examined an affected boat found the damage significant enough to declare the vessel unseaworthy. This is a matter of public record through official recall channels, not second-hand speculation. The recall was eventually closed years later, once the number of remaining repairs being submitted had dropped to a very small volume, suggesting most affected boats still in circulation had likely already been addressed, assuming the work was actually completed at the time. This concern is specific to the 1997 and 1998 production years. Other Mako 252 model years don't carry this same recorded issue, which is precisely why the exact year matters so much when shopping. A properly documented and repaired example from this window can still be a reasonable purchase. Look up the hull identification number, cross-reference it against the official recall record, and ask the seller for documentation proving any required repair was completed rather than a verbal assurance. So if you're looking at a 1997 or 1998 Mako 252, here's the thing to check first: the hull identification number against the recall record plus documentation confirming any repair was actually completed. If you're finding these documented boat checks useful, take a second to hit like and subscribe to Harbor Hook Boats. We dig through the details that can genuinely save you money before you buy. And there's one more entry left on this list, the most serious one. At number 1, Trophy 2503cc and 2502 Walkaround models from 2004 and 2005 carry the most serious documented issue on this entire list. Trophy built accessible, well-laid-out offshore center consoles that punched above their price point, giving anglers real capability without the premium price tag of more established offshore names. Boats from this era remain common on the used market and continue to draw buyers looking for genuine offshore capability at a reasonable cost. Here's why this one deserves your full attention. An official recall covering 83 boats from this specific production run identified a defect in the bulkheads separating the fuel tank compartment from other parts of the boat. Those bulkheads were found to potentially fail at properly isolating the fuel tank from components not rated as ignition safe. If fuel vapor accumulated in that space and reached an unprotected ignition source, the result could be a fire or explosion. Follow-up records show that among the boats inspected under the recall, 17 required correction, while 27 were found to be fine as built. This isn't a comfort complaint. This is a safety defect serious enough that a federal agency required the manufacturer to notify every affected owner directly, which is exactly why it earns the top spot on this list rather than the fuel tank or the hull crack. Here's the part that keeps this fair. Trophy addressed the defect through the recall process, the system specifically designed to catch and correct problems like this one. A boat from this range that received the corrected bulkhead configuration is no longer carrying that risk, and the danger isn't inherent to Trophy as a brand or present on boats outside this narrow window. Given what's being addressed, this isn't a boat to buy on trust alone. If you're considering a 2004 or 2005 Trophy 2503cc or 2502 Walkaround, verifying this repair is the single most important thing to do before you even discuss price. Ask for documentation confirming the recall repair was completed, and if the seller can't produce it, have a marine surveyor confirm the bulkhead configuration in person. So if you're looking at a 2004 or 2005 Trophy 2503cc or 2502 Walkaround, here's the thing to check first. Documented proof the bulkhead recall was completed, confirmed by a surveyor if the seller can't produce paperwork. So that covers the 3 specific models where used buyers genuinely need to slow down before signing anything. None of these stories are really about hating a brand. They're about understanding that a boat's individual history, not its logo, determines whether it's a smart purchase or an expensive lesson. A cheap Contender, Mako, or Trophy from these exact windows might be a completely safe, well-repaired boat, or it might not be, and the only way to know is to check. Now let's shift entirely, because the next 4 boats have earned the opposite reputation, the kind that makes owners hang on to them for decades. If a boat with a documented history can still be a smart buy once it's properly repaired, imagine what these next 4 look like when nothing ever needed fixing in the first place. Not every good boat has a dramatic origin story. Sometimes it's just decades of refusing to cut corners. At number 4, Parker has built its identity around one simple idea: refuse to let the boat fall apart, no matter how many years pass. Parker is the boat for the buyer who cares more about what happens after 10 years of ownership than what the boat looks like on day one. This manufacturer has spent decades building center consoles around a philosophy that favors function over flash. Rather than redesigning the lineup every few seasons chasing attention, Parker has stayed remarkably consistent, refining the same fundamentals instead of reinventing them. The hull uses solid fiberglass layups below the waterline, a choice that adds weight and cost, but removes the coring failures that quietly weaken many boats after years on the water. Owners tend to describe this boat with praise that sounds almost boring until you've experienced the alternative. Long-term owner feedback frequently points to strong, dependable engine performance, well beyond what buyers might expect from a boat in this price category, which is genuinely valuable when you're trying to avoid surprise repair bills. Ride quality is firm and predictable. Offshore capability is solid for the segment, and used market demand suggests buyers specifically seek this brand out because they know what they're getting. Comfort is where this boat asks for a trade-off, since the ride leans firm rather than plush, which matters if you're coming from a softer riding boat. Maintenance stays fairly straightforward, and resale value has historically held up well because informed used buyers actively look for this name on the secondhand market. This is the boat for serious inshore and nearshore anglers who want a rig that can absorb years of hard use without constant repair bills. If you're buying used, skip judging it by how shiny the gel coat looks. Have the engine compression tested and the transom checked for softness instead. A boat that looks rough cosmetically often has nothing wrong with it mechanically. Parker earns its spot through sheer stubborn reliability. The next boat earns its spot by refusing to accept a trade-off most other builders treat as unavoidable. At number 3, Grady-White has spent decades proving that offshore capability and genuine comfort don't have to be mutually exclusive. This builder has been refining its construction methods since the mid-1950s, one of the longer continuous track records in the entire industry. That history shows up in a solid fiberglass hull, paired with a deck and interior finish that feels noticeably more upscale than most offshore competitors at a similar size. Where Parker asks owners to accept a firmer ride in exchange for toughness, Grady-White aims for both at once. Ride quality strikes a rare balance, praised by owners as smooth enough for a relaxed weekend outing, confident enough when conditions turn genuinely serious offshore. Owners frequently describe holding onto the same hull for many years, occasionally swapping the engine along the way while the boat itself keeps going. Depreciation on this brand has developed a reputation for being gentler than buyers might expect for a boat at this price point, and resale demand has generally stayed strong, meaning owners often recover a meaningful share of what they originally paid whenever it comes time to sell. Used prices for this brand tend to span a wide range. Older, smaller models often start well below newer offshore-capable versions, so model year and equipment matter as much as the name on the hull when you're comparing listings. Maintenance runs moderate to high, reflecting the caliber of components used throughout. This is the boat for buyers who want serious offshore capability without sacrificing the comfort that makes every trip enjoyable, not just the fishing trips. If you're shopping used, have a marine surveyor check the transom and stringers carefully. Even a well-built boat benefits from a thorough structural check after years offshore. Comfort and capability together is a hard combination to find, and once a builder gets there, most stop chasing anything else. The next boat took a completely different bet, betting that modern materials could beat decades of tradition on pure performance. At number 2, Yellowfin represents a newer generation of offshore construction, one built around performance without giving up long-term structural integrity. Using advanced composite materials and careful weight distribution, Yellowfin's lightweight construction is a major part of its performance-focused identity, giving these boats the power-to-weight characteristics serious offshore anglers look for. Picture heading offshore, watching the weather window start to close behind you, needing every bit of speed and control your boat can give you to get home safely. That's the scenario this boat was engineered around from the start. Ride quality is often described by owners as a standout combination of speed and smoothness for the category. Long-term owner feedback has remained generally positive as more of these boats move into their second decade of service, and offshore capability is well regarded for serious long-range trips. Fuel efficiency is a notable part of the pitch here too. The lighter composite build is designed specifically to reduce fuel consumption compared to heavier traditional hulls, which owners frequently cite as a real cost advantage over time. The dealer network, while growing, remains smaller than some of the more established legacy brands, so specialized parts or repairs sometimes require working directly with the manufacturer rather than a wide network of independent shops. Resale demand has been building as the brand's reputation has grown, with depreciation described by owners as gentler than they expected from a comparatively newer name in the industry. This is the boat for performance-focused offshore anglers who want cutting-edge engineering without gambling on an unproven newer builder. If you're buying used, review documented maintenance history closely, since low engine hours alone never guarantee a boat was properly cared for. Yellowfin proves modern engineering can genuinely compete with decades of tradition, but nothing else in this entire category has built a reputation like what's waiting at number 1. A reputation that started with a stunt most manufacturers still wouldn't dare attempt today. At number 1, Boston Whaler earned its position through more than 60 years of proof, starting with a demonstration that's still talked about today. In the early 1960s, the company famously cut one of its own boats clean in half with a saw and ran both halves separately on open water to prove they would still float and still perform. That demonstration wasn't the reason this boat holds the top spot, but it set the tone for an engineering philosophy that's remained central to the brand for over 6 decades since. The real case for Boston Whaler is everything that's happened in the decades after that demonstration. The construction sandwiches a foam core between layers of fiberglass, creating a structure that resists the flexing responsible for stress cracks in less rigid designs. Long-term owner feedback consistently points to boats still in active service after 30, even 40 years, sometimes owned by the very same family that purchased them new. Many owners describe keeping these boats far longer than they originally planned to, a pattern that shows up repeatedly across long-term ownership discussions and points to something deeper than simple brand loyalty. Offshore and inshore capability are both well regarded, and dealer support along with parts availability have developed a strong reputation within the industry. The honest trade-off is that maintenance runs slightly higher than some other brands, largely because parts and service carry a premium tied to the reputation itself, and fuel economy is reasonable rather than class-leading given the heavier foam-filled construction. Resale demand has stayed notably strong, even on boats decades old, a pattern owners and dealers alike point to when explaining why the brand commands a premium on the used market. This is the boat for nearly every type of buyer, from families who want something they can keep for generations, to serious anglers who want complete confidence in their platform regardless of conditions. If you're buying used, always ask whether the hull has ever been checked for water intrusion. A qualified surveyor can usually detect it with sound testing or a moisture meter in just a few minutes. Boston Whaler isn't perfect, and it isn't the cheapest boat to own or maintain. What it offers instead is a combination almost nothing else on this list can match: decades of proven reliability, resale demand that's held up across very different market conditions, and a level of owner loyalty other builders spend entire marketing budgets trying to manufacture. That combination, not the story about cutting a boat in half, is why it holds the top spot. So here's the real lesson from everything we've covered today. Don't buy the cheapest boat on the lot, and don't buy on brand name alone either. Buy the boat with the best combination of condition, documented history, construction, and long-term ownership cost, because that combination is what actually determines whether you're happy with this purchase 5 years from now, not the number on the price tag today or the logo on the hull. If you had to spend your own money on one boat from this list tomorrow, which one are you buying? And which one would you never buy without checking the model year and recall history first? Tell us both in the comments. Your honest input could help another buyer make the right decision. If this breakdown helped you think differently about your next purchase, hit like, subscribe to Harbor Hook Boats, and turn on notifications so you never miss the guides that could save you thousands before you sign anything. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Harbor Hook Boats adventure.